First of all, welcome everyone. Welcome to our second ever virtual panel for PRSSA Reimagined, and I'm so excited you all could join us today. So my name is Lauren Gay, and I am the current president for Kennesaw State University's PRSSA chapter. PRSSA Reimagined is a national programming partnership between my university, Kennesaw State, American University, Grand Valley State University, Stanford University, the University of Memphis, and West Texas A&M University. They came together over the summer. We realized that because of COVID-19 this year, that a lot of chapters, that the school year was going to look different and that many chapters would be looking for additional programming opportunities. So thank you so much to the advisors and the other students involved. So there will be 3 other virtual panels throughout this semester, so keep an eye out on our Facebook page for more information about those events. Tonight, we are going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion within communications and media with our amazing guest speakers, Suresh Raj, Valerie Lopez, and Latashia DeVeaux, who will introduce themselves in just a moment. So before we get started, just a few quick kind of housekeeping things. Please double check that your audio is muted. Throughout the panel, feel free to tweet using the hashtag PRThursday about different things you've learned or that have touched you throughout the panel and that you want to share. And also towards the end of the panel, there will be a Q&A session. So throughout the chat, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. And if there's a question you want to ask to a specific panelist, be sure to specify that in the question. Lastly, as a reminder, there will be an optional student networking and breakout rooms after the panel. So stick around for that. And with that being said, we will get started. So Valerie Lopez, if you would like to introduce yourself, that would be perfect.
Hi, everyone. Let's all be friends. I'm Val. I am based in Chicago, and I'm Global Head of Employee Engagement and Inclusion at Cision. So if you don't know what Cision is, we provide software and services for PR and communications professionals. So many of you might have used our media database, maybe at some point in an internship, maybe through some of your coursework. So yeah, and in terms of education, I'm an Indiana University alum, Bloomington campus, and I majored in gender studies and broadcast journalism. I honestly, when I majored in gender studies almost 20 years ago, I did not think I'd find a job in that. So things have come full circle. I never did pursue broadcast journalism, but things happen. And I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. Suresh, if you would like to go next and introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi, I'm Suresh. I am my dog's just found a toy and is squeaking it. I'm so sorry. But I'm Suresh. I'm the Chief Business Development Officer of one of the world's largest marketing communications group. It's called Blue Focus International, and we have multiple agencies within it. One of it is a major PR agency, Citizen Relations, and I'm proud to report, by the way, Valerie, our entire network uses Cision. So I checked on it. So we use Cision. And in my role, my main focus is actually driving growth across the portfolio of agencies that we have, which includes PR, advertising, digital, social media, and so on. And one of the biggest passion points for me since moving to the US, my career started in the UK, is actually driving in a very inclusive teams and very diverse teams whenever we put teams together for solutions for client brand problems. So that's my view on that.
Awesome. And last but definitely not least, Ms. Latashia DeVeaux.
Good morning. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, that lets you know how my week has been going. So I have to follow Valerie and Suresh. Thank you very much. I am Latashia DeVeaux. I am a senior consultant senior PR consultant at ViacomCBS. My business account is BET Networks. I am also the current president of Black Public Relations Society, the Los Angeles chapter. I began my career in public relations and communications. This is my 22nd year. Primarily, I have worked in the entertainment industry with clients also in the digital and technology space, as well as luxury automotive and health and wellness. And I'm quite excited to be here with you guys. I was just surprised and shocked that you guys would want to hear from me.
Oh, no, always. Yes, definitely. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So for the first question, and I'll throw it to Tasha, how do you define diversity and inclusion at your companies in your various areas?
You know what? How I define it is equity and belonging with everyone, no matter how you look, your gender, ethnicity, race, everyone belonging, everyone having a seat at the table, everyone having an equal opportunity to participate at every level. One of the things at my organization, which is ViacomCBS, we are having very open and honest conversations on including all employees and even our consultants at every level having a voice in making changes. What we are currently experiencing at the moment, it's not an easy conversation. It's going to take some time, but I think the fact that this particular organization is giving a voice to those who oftentimes are overlooked but have probably the most to say are being included in the conversations.
Okay, awesome. And Suresh, do you have any, how do you define diversity and inclusion at your organization as well?
I think one of the biggest challenges in the PR industry in particular, and I've been quite vocal about this in various industry publications, is a lot of big organizations tend to think that it is simply because, if you literally increase the number of people who look diverse, you've fixed the problems, and that isn't the solution. It is ultimately about how, and I love the two words, Latashia, you used, which was equality and equity, and that's exactly what we need. We need people of color and minorities of all the spectrum, so whether that's race, gender, sexuality, or ability, to actually have an equal seat at the table, the decision-making table, the environment where the culture of the agency is formed. In addition to that, also equity, and equity in terms of ownership of these businesses, ownership of the responsibilities, ownership of the decisions. And only when that happens can actually an organization really call itself diverse. And it's not just, a lot of organizations literally have a policy and they feel they've answered the question, but when you go in, it's a very monochrome agency. And monochrome not just from visually, but monochrome in terms of the way they think and the way they operate. So for me, it is across the entire spectrum.
Okay. And Valerie, how do you define diversity and inclusion at your company as well?
Yeah, I mean, we're a multinational organization representing global employees. So it's really important that we have a representation that reflects the communities and the clients that we serve. And following up on Suresh and Tasha, it's, on top of having a seat at the table, it's also being asked for our opinion at the table. And wanting to hear our perspectives and be part of that decision-making process. So I think our journey has been, it's baby steps, but we need more progress. It's, okay, we're at the table, but are we heard? Are we included? And that's the biggest piece, that you can't have diversity without inclusion if you want a successful company. And, I think some organizations, Cision needs more work. I'm going to be candid. So I'm not going to be the person in the glass house. I recognize that. But I think it's more than just having one or two people and saying we're done. We don't want tokens. We need to make sure that we're moving away from that dominant group and we're more equal. And then in terms of equity, I think it's highlighting that, we all have individual needs. So we're not at the same place, and understanding that our employees have different needs and what can we do to help them thrive at Cision.
Gotcha. So along the lines of having that seat at the table and diversity and inclusion, why do you think diversity and inclusion is becoming such a prominent topic now in the industry more than ever than, say, 10, 15 years ago? And Suresh, if you want to start with that question.
I have an interesting theory on this, and literally it's COVID related now. And I don't know whether it would have been as prominent had COVID not hit, right? And I do think because COVID has hit, people have actually been, have struggled working from home, and there's, mental health and wellness balance issues there, etc. And people have then, been open to social media. People are engaging with social media more because they're homebound, they're working from home, so they're engaging a lot more. And through that, we're seeing the proliferation of how minorities are being treated in social contexts. Now, that has bubbled up. We've seen the Black Lives Matter movement and all the other different big social movements that have actually hit to the core. Now, movements like that don't just change the social concept, but it literally shifts and changes how businesses are reacting to it, how brands are reacting to it. And suddenly every organization is under the spotlight. Do you align yourselves with what's happening in terms of Black Lives Matter? Do you understand what's actually shifting in our communities, in our organizations? And because of that, it's always been an underlying current. And I think for the last 2-3 years, we've had bits of conversations in and outside of the industry, but suddenly everything that's hit mainstream has become so real that every organization now is under the spotlight. And we've heard about how some of the big PR agencies are actually looking at their, committing to diversify their workforce and the diverse boards, etc. But frankly, my 2 pence on that is, it's a little late. These organizations have existed for tens and tens of years. To suddenly say, well, we're going to commit to change it. What have you been doing all these years? Did you wait for a moment like this to suddenly say, I have to change it? But, for me, I think all these social movements have actually given voice and given real fire to the need for social change within organizations. And I really think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot more conversation on it.
Okay. Tasha, do you have any other things to add to this question as well? Why do you feel it's becoming more prominent today than ever, really?
Well, because we're tired, and we as minority groups, Black people in particular, we are done with being silent and being polite in how we share how we are not included, or how we are being feeling dehumanized. And goes to the question, the statement earlier, well, not being at the table. So you have organizations now who are, okay, we're going to commit to diversity, we're throwing money or tens of millions of dollars at such and such at different organizations, or we're committing to making these steps, but you still don't have people at the table who can say from the beginning, this is not right, or this is some BS, or instead of doing this, how about we do this? So you have people at the table who are making decisions who have not been impacted by the things that we're currently seeing. I think because the awareness, or it's heightened now, is because things are on TV, but this is nothing new. So someone who looks like me, I have been experiencing this for 44 years. This is nothing new for me. Being a professional Black woman in the space, I have oftentimes been the only at every level. I remember working at Rogers & Cowan when my career first began over 20 years ago, and I was the only African-American young lady. I didn't have anyone I could look up to. Now, don't get me wrong, there were some amazing PR practitioners, but if I was having challenges specifically because I was facing them because of my race or my ethnicity, there was no one I could talk to. There were people who understood being a woman, but we didn't have those type of conversations. It was very taboo. And, to a certain degree now, some things, like the conversations, they're being had more, but they're still very uncomfortable. And we have to have uncomfortable conversations. And that's why it's heightened. It's the awareness is what it is, because we no longer care about feelings. This is not a feeling. This is what's happening, and we have to address it, period.
Lovely. And Valerie?
I can't follow that. But I will say that as a Gen Xer, I think moving through my career and kind of being told, well, that's just how it is. That's just the status quo, that you just kind of have to do it this way. And now seeing the generational shift through leadership, we're seeing leaders change. Baby boomers are starting to leave those leadership roles. Gen Xers are coming on board. Gen Z, as a Gen X or Gen Z, my goodness, thank you. I think that you aren't taking it. You are challenging things, and you're saying, why is it done this way? Why can't it be changed, right? And so it's just a mentality shift, a generational shift, which is really amazing to see. And, I've have been the only, and I'm still the only in a lot of cases. And for me, I identify, there's that intersectionality to us, right? I'm a woman, I'm Asian, and I'm gay. But to me, I've experienced more racism in my life than any of the other identities. So when I walk into a room or a party, I will quickly look around to see, am I the only? And so when I get invited to house parties, I'm filled with anxiety because I just have that trauma of, am I the only one? Am I going to have things said to me? Am I going to get those stares? So, to see the shift and to see more allies and to see more people speak up for people who are marginalized, and to see it happen in the workplace now, that's definitely a shift from, I'm sure Suresh and Tasha, you can agree, from when we started in our careers, where it's just like, keep your mouth shut. That's just how it is.
Absolutely. And actually, I'll put, it's funny talking about that, and completely agree with everything Tasha and Valerie you just said. When I started my career in London, it was an agency of about 80 people, and I was the only person with dark skin. I remember that moment, the day I started, and I come from a country that was a British colony, and my first job was in London. And I remember that feeling like I was in a position of servitude. Again, in terms of, it's a British colony, these are all white English people, and there was just something in me, and nobody treated me like a slave, but there was an innate feeling like I was in an innate position of servitude, and it was a very difficult feeling to escape from. Fast forward 23 years later, I have a C-suite position, and last year, in our global board meeting in Beijing, we had 56 leaders, global leaders from all the different companies in the room, and I turned around and I was again the only person with dark skin in the room. The difference, however, was I finally was brave enough to say something, and I had the seniority enough to make a change, and I realized that was the responsibility. So in that meeting, when I was on one of the discussions, I turned around and looked around the room, looked at the CEO and looked at the executive chairwoman in the eyes and said, look, I want to point out something here. We're a global agency. There are 56 global leaders in this room, and I'm the only person with dark skin in this room. This is unacceptable. And it was the uncomfortable conversation that I needed to have. And look, I've earned the right to have it, and it made me uncomfortable because, like, I'm thinking, oh my God, is this going to cost me my job? But of course it didn't cost me my job, but it comes with that responsibility. You have to address it. And the generation I see now, my niece is about to enter university next year, and it's one of the most vocal generations where they step up and they prop up and they actually address these changes, and that's the kind of thing that we need to see a lot more of.
Okay. And so, Suresh, you kind of already touched on it with saying that big corporations, like did they wait until this moment to finally start really honing in on the diversity and inclusion, or is it something that they kind of been, like, the efforts were there but it wasn't fully implemented? So to everyone, again, do you think that agencies and corporations are just implementing these diversity and inclusion efforts just for the aesthetic or the public appeal, or do you think that companies are really trying to make an effort to change the diversity within their corporations? And
I think there are two schools of thoughts here in terms of there are some that are genuinely doing it, and there's some are doing it for lip service because it's great PR, right? Like, to be seen to be doing something good for the industry. I think if they're genuinely, if they're authentic about it, they will fix the problem first. They will fix the problem. They will diversify their workforce, and they will show quantifiably how it has improved their performance, improved their delivery, and improved their relevance in the world. And only then should they go out to market and say, we've done it and we've proven it, and therefore this is very real and this is successful. Otherwise, for me, everything else is a slip service.
Sorry, Valerie, if you would like to add as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's certainly a lot of organizations that are doing it. They're feeling pressured, and with social media now, they're being called out, what's your statement? What are you doing around this? And so I think there's definitely organizations that are doing it just to do it because everyone else is and they feel pressure. But that's not to say that there are organizations that do mean it. and are actually putting action and the work behind it. And it takes time. And I think it really does start with the CEO and that leadership team to understand, are they out there speaking on it? Are they actually, tweeting and putting money where it is? And you can put out a corporate statement, but at the end of the day, what's the leader of that team doing? And like Suresh was saying, it comes down to, we all know that it's the right thing to do, but genuinely to be successful, you need to have a company that's diverse. It helps you be innovative. There are studies where revenue increases in terms of employee retention. 80% of employees in a study have said that a company that's committed to diversity and inclusion is willing to stay at that organization. So there's just so many positive impacts to it that I think people don't realize that. They just think, well, let's just put out a corporate statement and call it done. But what can you do to really value top talents from all different backgrounds?
And Tasha, if you have anything else to add to this discussion as well.
Companies, I will say that I'm a part of conversations, and I know organizations that I'm not affiliated with are making really concerted efforts to, it's not just lip service. They are having the very uncomfortable conversations at every level on what needs to be done and why are we here? What haven't we been doing? What are we guilty of? Like one organization was like, look, for example, in entertainment publicity, you guys, I don't do it anymore, but I've had to work on red carpets. And one of the things I brought up was, none of my peers, independent practitioners, or even small publicists who are at smaller agencies can get their clients on these carpets. Why is that? It used to be where you had to be in a unit in the Publicist Guild. They don't have that anymore. The Publicist Guild, it still exists, but that is no longer a requirement. So why are they still having such a tough time? Well, it's because they're either who they represent or people at this conglomerate won't allow publicists either that look like me or look like don't have a certain level of clients or talent to walk their carpet. And so the president of this particular organization said, okay, why is that? What are we doing? So we need to start having conversations. He did a roundtable with publicists, all over Los Angeles, like, what have we done? Why have you felt excluded? Those are conversations that will not make it to the press, but I see the efforts of what is happening and what they are doing to make sure that they are truly including everyone, every person that look like some of us. You think about L Brands. L Brands, they are the parent company for Victoria's Secret. For many, many years, if you guys follow that, they were very adamant about not a size inclusivity. They did not want to include anybody over size 6. Well, what happened? Rihanna, she dropped Fenty. You had so many others like, okay, you know what? I'm going to make sure that my makeup, my clothes fit everyone from a size 0 up to a, 30X or whatever exists. And she killed the game. And then you had L Brands, Victoria's Secret was like, well, you know what? Our demographic is this, and we're sticking with that. Well, okay, yeah, you keep doing that. And look what happened. Now they're fledgling, they're having a hard time, and they can't get anybody to buy buy their stuff. So now, look. So they're a little bit behind the 8 ball, but they weren't authentic, and they're still not authentic. They stand by, and I'm like, stand by what you believe. If you believe that this is your demo, and you're only going to service women that is a size 6 and below, okay, stick with that. But it's going to hit you in your pockets, and that's exactly what happened. So you have the lip service, and you have an organization that's actually doing the work. I notice what is happening now.
And so we understand that having a diverse and inclusive workplace, it can't just happen overnight. Like, it has to have, there has to be work put in, work has to be involved. So throughout your different organizations, what are some challenges that you have faced in trying to build a diverse workplace? And Valerie, if you want to start with that question.
I think it's, again, I brought up intersectionality earlier, but it's intersectionality. We are, when we talk about gender equality and having more women move up in leadership, unfortunately, it defaults to white women. And so when you see leadership and gender representation increase, but then you look at the number of Black women, Asian women, it's so small. So it's trying to find, okay, yes, we're making progress in gender, but let's look at intersectionality. Let's look at women of color. Same goes for LGBTQ. It's not one catch-all group. We need to think about our transgender employees. I think people just lump groups together and then call it a day. So it's kind of really looking at the data and understanding that we're all so different. We're all so intersectional. We all have different needs. And how can we see sort of that movement and success rise when it comes to people in leadership, or the overall makeup of an organization? What does that look like? Is it skewed to one place? If it's increasing, is it increasing based on one type of demographic? So it's really looking at things holistically.
Okay. Suresh?
Sorry, I just realized I was on mute. We implemented something when I joined this company in a couple of years ago, because one thing I did realize was it was a very, very, very white workforce. There was a part of the business that wasn't, which is the finance team, but everybody else was very white. And you think about it, we're a communications team that's a very one-sided view of the world that goes into the brand planning and comms planning, so on and so forth. And then I asked the talent team, why is that? Why do we have a very, very monochrome team, to be honest, because everybody sort of looks similar and everybody has a similar walk of life, and they didn't have an answer. So we tried an experiment. As CVs came into the business, it was disseminated as the managers decide who was actually going to, who's going to be appointed, who's going to be interviewed. And then one thing we realized is in the filtering process, anybody who had a different sounding name often fell off the shortlist. All the ones with the, and I mean this in the most respectful sort of way, but everybody who had an accepted name like a Ben Smith or a Jane Smith, those tend to get through because it was almost like I can deal with that, I can relate to that. So I challenged the talent team to say, look, we're going to do blind CVs. Obviously when the CVs come in, they have their names, but before the CVs are disseminated to everybody, we're going to remove all the names. I want all the managers to actually focus on the talent, focus on the skill set and the experience. That's the thing that should go on the merit of the quality of the individual. And amazingly, we started hiring more people of color, more minorities, because it was, and that's not a reflection that people who are not a minority or be a person of color doesn't have the same level of expertise or qualification, but it's the fact that we were suddenly getting an equal platform when it came to CVs and talent. People were being transparent about focusing on the talent rather than the name and being influenced by that name. And that literally was a simple exercise that changed the perception of how people were. And as more people of color and minorities came into the business, we start to feel like, wow, that we have something to offer here that's quite different. And it was us actually doing a lot of internal soul searching, internalization to change the business. And one of the things I do want to, because it's a point of pride, is about 2.5 months ago, I hosted and curated a conversation with Professor Kendi, Ibram Kendi, the author of How to Be Anti-Racist. And it was all 4,000 of our employees dialed in. It was only an internal focused event because we wanted to have that uncomfortable conversation from the most senior individual to the most junior. We have to have that uncomfortable conversation. And from that, we've splintered off to actually have small cultural groups discussing how they're taking that and actually putting it into action. Just listening to a conversation doesn't help. How do they take that and implement it as action within their business and within their communities? They have to take that back within their communities. That, for me, is when we start to see real change.
And Tashia?
Yes, it will take time, but one of the things I am constantly doing is having these conversations or educating those that I work with or those that I'm, any conversation I'm having is that we are not a monolithic group. We are all Black people, all those from the Black diaspora, those who are, from a Latin, Hispanic community. Like, we're not a monolithic person, like people. There's differences in all of us. And I think the problem is, the reason why it's going to take so long, it's going to take time, and it's taking long because they want to have this just one conversation and just assume that we're all the same, and we are not. And I think the longer, or the more that they're not unwilling to understand that and truly get it, the longer it's going to take. Like Suresh said, at our organization, they just started having conversations, including everyone in the conversation, because far too long, you've been having these very high level conversations with the same people who look the same. Like, that's why you've missed the mark for 30, 40 plus years. You're going to continue doing so when you don't include everyone. So you wonder why there's so many different type of organizations, ethnic or minority organizations, because we had to create our own table. Like, we had to build a table. Like, bringing a folding table just wasn't enough. So now we started creating tables and bringing chairs and bringing an entire building into a building, because you guys were not listening. And you guys were still thinking that it's not a one for all. Everyone is not like me. And I get that. So I'm trying to teach you that. And once they're willing and they get it, then we can start to move forward.
Perfect. And alongside those lines of, bringing you have to start creating spaces and bringing that your seat at the table. Can you share, each of you, just share one example of how your organizations, whether you have a diversity and inclusion policy in place or are creating one, has impacted your employees and the people that you work with? And if Valerie, if you would like to start.
Yeah, I'm going to start with just looking at our policies and handbook and all of that, right? Making sure that it's inclusive, making sure that transgender employees feel included and they feel safe at the organization, and that it's actually spelled out in our handbook, right? That's where I think we just need to be clear as an organization to make our statement that we have zero tolerance for disrespect, for racism, for discrimination, even, for microaggressions. And that's such a hard thing to really define, but being able to have guidelines on, what is the process if you've experienced a microaggression at the organization? Here's how you can report it. Here's the process that we have at the company. So I think a lot of people are just afraid to report things because it's not in the handbook, or they feel crazy, or they feel like they're being gaslit, right? Especially when it comes to microaggressions. So being clear in our policy, I think first and foremost states to our employees, this is what we're committed to. And then there are other things that we've done across the business. It's, all of our single-use restrooms, we're making sure that they're gender neutral, right? Just really making sure that we have rooms for nursing mothers, or rooms for maybe prayer or spiritual rooms. So there's just different things that we're starting to set up in our offices across the globe. And I'm not saying it's in every office yet, but we're getting there, and we're starting to do that piece by piece. But just making sure that we have things where on day one, people see things visually that, oh yeah, I do feel included. I do feel like I belong.
Tashia, if you'd like to add.
I'll be honest. My organization, they're slow. They're slow. There's no consistency. So of course, it started out like, what can we do? This is what we're going to do. And then, after a while, it's like things have died down, and it's very, very unfortunate. And then you have people who are uncomfortable speaking up because you don't want to rock the boat, or you're just sitting back waiting to see, okay, well, maybe, it's this, or maybe it's that, or we're focusing on this. And it's like, no, everything is important. And, we're going to take you to task. You said you're going to do this. It's not even what you said, it's what needs to happen. And I think, there's no longer there's a lack of transparency, and there's no accountability. So at one point, again, you were including, at least everyone thought they had a voice. And now all of a sudden it is back to high level my peers or, senior vice presidents and above that are part of these conversations. And then you have someone like myself saying, okay, what about, an intern who has some great ideas or X, Y, and Z, or, we noticed this. And again, the feedback can come at every level. So, my organization is, the consistency is not there. And that is a huge problem. And no one wants to call it. And I'm sure it's not just my organization, there's other organizations. So for me, it's holding them accountable to not what you said you were going to do, what needs to be done.
And Suresh?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Tasha. That's perfectly put. It's not just the words, but it's the action that follows through. And I think that's what I was referring to before in terms of lip service. A lot of organizations are saying, we're going to commit to this, we're going to do this. Stop saying you're going to do these things. Do it. Do it and show that you're changing. And I think maybe, and we are not perfect, our organization's got about 4,000 employees, and we have a lot of challenges, and, we're split across the globe, and we're doing the things that we can manage within such a large number of people. So I talked about the blind CVs, for example, implementing that's a physical change in process that's actually resulting in change of people walking through the door. And then in addition to all the sponsors, so like for example, we are one of the key sponsors for the LeGrant Foundation, which is a group of ethnic minority and minority audiences, LGBTQ students who are coming up the ranks of communications and actually looking for opportunities. So we're actively going there. We present to them. We spend a whole day with them. We've got a pipeline of talent coming through that. I talked about having that uncomfortable conversation and literally having Professor Kendi and 4,000 employees dialing in from everywhere in the world and actually owning up that they never realized that their inaction leads to an act of racism, because they're not actively going out there and calling people names, etc., but because they don't act on it when things happen, they're complicit to it. And it's actually educating them in that process that really starts to drive change. So we have a long way to go, but these are small snippets of how we're starting to move the dial. And I take responsibility as somebody who's very senior in the organization, and I've earned that with a lot of stripes, and that does give me not just the right, but the responsibility to bring up the uncomfortable conversation when I'm in the boardroom, because it's in the boardroom when things change. And I'm still the only person of color in the boardroom, but I have to, it's uncomfortable for me to bring it up, but it's more uncomfortable for the many people who suffer in the system. And therefore, let's have that transparent conversation. And, that's part of the responsibility.
So thinking ahead in the future, in the next 5 to 10 years, if we implement these diversity and inclusion initiatives, and if our organizations, start to, implement them and make them happen, what do you predict will happen within the PR and communications industry with diversity and inclusion? And Valerie, if you want to start.
I was hoping you wouldn't start with me. That's a hard one. I genuinely don't know, because it's been such slow progress that I can't even envision that moment happening, to be honest. And things change so quickly in society and culture that we're never going to get to the point where we can say we're done. It's always going to be a point where we constantly are going to have to evolve, and we're constantly going to have to work at being equitable and being equal in things. So I honestly can't really say. I do know that we're starting to see a shift in what our clients and prospective clients are wanting in their vendors, at least for our organization. We're seeing a lot of sales proposals coming in asking, what are you doing around diversity and inclusion? What does your demographic makeup look like? And so I think we're going to see clients really asking people that they partner with and vendors on, these are our values around diversity and inclusion, what are you doing? And so you'll start to lose business if you don't have anything as an organization. So I think we're going to see more of that.
Suresh?
I'll give an example. Many years ago, I was working in one of the biggest ad agencies in the world, and I walked past this room with three super intelligent creatives who are coming up with this brilliant campaign for Huggies, the nappy brand. And they had all these amazing taglines, and they're working through the creative, etc. And then my colleague and I, we walked past and we saw the work, and we said, are you sure that message is going to land? And they go, of course it is, etc. And I go, yeah, but Huggies is a brand that's really, revered by mothers. Mothers are the main buying audience, and all three of you are male. You don't even have a point of view of a woman and a mother in this campaign. Like, how much more off-center can you be? So the reason I tell you that story is because getting to the heart of where this industry is going to go, a lot of people thinking like you slap on a diversity inclusive leader, you hire somebody to lead diversity inclusive, that's the band-aid. Yeah, we're done. We've sorted out the problem. I personally think, and my nephew decided to do communications as a degree, and I actually warned him not to do it because I was very fearful of his career in this. And he's a black kid, he's a young black boy. I genuinely hope that businesses who've committed to actually driving in inclusivity and diversity 5 years from now actually come out with their results. And I actually will hold the PR industry trade media responsible to actually dig these stories out again. 5 years from now, I want to see the story in the headline, the big agencies who said we're committing to diversifying our board, etc. I want to see that the business has changed, and I want to hear and see the results, because only then will there be proof on the table. Because otherwise, if 5 years from now they've done nothing, I also want to hear the report that calling them out. You talked about all of this, you played the good game, you did great PR for yourself, but where is your accountability today, 5 years later?
And then Tasha?
Oh, goodness. Wow. I second what Valerie and Suresh said. I will say this. I don't know, because this is an ever-changing industry, I don't know where will we. I will say in the now, because of what's going on, a lot of organizations have reached out to the organization that I lead, Black Public Relations Society of Los Angeles. A lot of our board members, fortunately and unfortunately, my board members are those who work for other organizations. They are the only either on their team or at the organization. So they have taken their companies to task, like, look, this has always been a problem. I don't understand how am I the only Black person on the team? And now I become the spokesperson for everything, all things Black. And again, that's not only is it's not right. And I've been having these conversations for quite some time. So what they're doing, or what our organization is doing, is we're having the really hard conversations with organizations that want to partner, like our corporate partners. They have come to like, look, we know we have failed in this area. We know we are failing. What do we do? How do we hire? Where do we go to find PR professionals of color, Black publicists, Black PR practitioners? Where do we go? So for us, one of the things that we have done is like, look, we're not the answer to it all, but what we do have is we have diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioners in our organization. We have communication strategists of all levels. We have PR professionals. We even have HR professionals of all levels in our organization. And so one of the things that we do is, not only do we help to get our members or whoever hired, like we make sure that you are trained, you are equipped, you're trained, and you are able to work at any organization at whatever level. So in having those conversations with our corporate partners, they are not the most comfortable, because they are kind of embarrassed that they've been in a position for quite some time and have not had anybody at a certain level, other than an intern and maybe an assistant or an account executive, move up the ranks. And I'm like, that's why you guys have had a revolving door. Agency life, or even studio networks, what have you, the life can be brutal, but there's a revolving door, because you make it to where we hit the glass ceiling at an entry level, but we're operating at a mid-level, if not a senior level a role. So the changes that we hope to see, we will play a role in that, because being an inclusive organization, but a minority professional organization, we have what you need, but you have to be willing to work with us and truly hire people that look like some of us on this call.
Okay.
Lauren, I'd like to add one more point, and I think Valerie and both Tasha also said it. There needs to also be pressure from the client side, right? So the brands need to demand diverse teams in the way they make the agency supply the teams and make up the team. So I remember at my time at Ogilvy, we pitched for Hewlett Packard and General Mills, and those were actually the diverse makeup of the team was a prerequisite of the actual response team. And the client said, if you don't turn up with a proper gender balance, racial balance, understanding of sexuality and ability in your team, you are discounted from the pitch. And that forced the agencies to shift their own talent model. Like, they looked in their own books and said, do we actually have these people? And if we don't, how do we bring these people on board? So that added pressure, I think, is really important.
And that all makes a lot of sense. Thank you for those insights. And we're going to do one more question, and then we're going to move to our Q&A panel. So if you guys have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat now before we start. So we have a lot of PRSSA members, which is still in college, and we have a lot of new graduates. So what would be your advice to the next generation of communications professionals, or those moving into starting their careers, on how to continue diversity and inclusion efforts within the agencies and corporations and organizations that might be their future employers or they might be working for? And then Tasha, if you would like to start this question.
You know what? So someone, I believe Avery Jones, posed a question about, it being bold to ask during an interview. The timing now, no, it's not. It's not faux pas, or it's not too bold to ask. What is your makeup of people of color and people with disabilities, so forth and so on. I don't think that's one way how you can continue the or be a part of the conversations, simply asking that question. And don't be afraid to ask. I think that's a very valid question, or very valid point to ask. Like, I don't want to be at an organization where everyone looks like me, but it's great to have conversations with people who can understand, okay, I am feeling I'm experiencing challenges in this area, and it could be a cultural thing. Well, someone who is, not African-American or African-American woman really wouldn't understand. So it is really incredibly helpful to see people that look like you. Or when I'm working on campaigns, as part, working on campaigns where you are, you want to get the opinion of Black moms, or, moms of a certain, whatever the case may be, but to ask someone their opinion about, like, let's say, for example, one of the things that are facing African-American women or mothers is death immortality. That is a huge thing for Black mothers. White moms, I'm sure no one wants to lose their babies or are afraid of childbirth, but that's not something that they're experiencing. So to work on a campaign when we're trying to increase those the numbers on people in the healthcare space, to talk to those who don't look like us, that's a very challenging conversation to have. So I think being a part of those conversations very, very early and asking those questions, that's where students and recent graduates, when you're job searching, that's the role that you could play.
Valerie, if you would like to add.
Yeah, 100% what Tasha said. Ask what the company's doing. Ask how you can help. Be that person. Don't wait for someone to volunteer. Be that person. And I believe me not, that you're not the only person to have asked. There could be a team of you that have already asked this. So I say, find a leader at the organization that you think is a good change advocate, is an inclusive leader that maybe has the ear at the executive level, and go to them and ask them, hey, I want to see change. I want to help in the space around equity and inclusion and diversity. So I think it doesn't matter what level you are. I think you just ask how you can help, ask what we're doing around a certain space. So I would say just don't be shy. I think we're past that time, and I think there are a lot of inclusive leaders now that don't care about titles. They care about what's best for the organization and what's best for their people.
And Suresh?
I will say, if you go to an organization and they get uncomfortable with you asking the question about what's their, the company's DE&I policy, and they don't want to answer that question or say it's not a question you should have asked, my response really is that the question is that the company you want to be at, right? So like this is table stakes now. Diversity, equity, inclusion are all table stakes. I would elevate it further to actually ask, what is the company's purpose? And purpose across everything. Their contribution to society, their contribution to the world in terms of economically, in terms of, sustainability. What is their commitment? Because honestly, the generation that's coming up, it's your generation. You are redefining this world in terms of, consumption of, food, product, and, how we keep the environment, the people that we have around us socially, and the rest of the world needs to catch up. They need to shift. And if organizations are not going to embrace these conversations, then you have to question whether it's an organization you want to be with.
Another thing I'll add real quickly, ask them to tell you about their employee resource groups. If they say, oh, we don't have any, that's a problem. Or if they say, okay, we only have this and this, I'm like, wow, okay, so interesting. Then that also lets you know, where they're lacking. And then from there, you can decide, okay, I wouldn't say your first day or week or even your first month. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to start this, in ERG for whichever group, but that may be something along, down the line that you may be willing to found and lead, so that's another good thing to do, is ask about, what were they doing internally for for diverse employees.
Perfect. So we are going to move on to our Q&A. Thank you all for those lovely questions from the chat. So to start off, our first question is, if you find yourself in a company where they have a weak representation of DE&I and initiative, what are your specific suggestions / recommendations for how you would go about seeking change and starting conversation without having seniority or credibility? So if you were an intern or an associate or like an entry-level professional. And Natasha, I know you kind of touched on that, but Suresh, if you'd like to start with this question.
Oh, I was worried you're going to ask me first.
I'm always picking the wrong people to start.
Listen, I think, one of the most important gatekeepers in a business is the people who lead talent, right? Because they have the ears of everybody. They understand the network. They know where the push and pull of an organization is. I think aligning yourself closely with talent, if you've spotted that there is a gap, first of all, think how you can contribute to the conversation. Make sure that you have a plan that how you can contribute, how you can create, and how you can engage. Then I would say you need to align yourself with someone in talent. Hopefully that the lead of talent say, and talk very openly about your plan. Like, I'd like to do this. What support can I gather? And often these conversations will end up at the board level saying, look, we have a really eager employee, great idea. We want the board support. And frankly, if the board turns around and say, no, we're not going to support an ERG, we're not going to support this minority group, again, I'd question, is that the right place for you? For me, because these things should be embraced, especially when we've got eager talent, your junior talent who want to drive change, and that should be embraced completely. So I would say start with understanding what your contribution is going to be, how you devise a plan, how you go about doing it. Align yourself with the talent in the organization, i.e. the person who heads the talent, and then collaboratively find out how you can help solve the problem. You're not going to solve it overnight, but what is, also think about what the journey is. Okay, let's talk about a 3-month milestone, a 6-month milestone, a year from now. What can we anticipate and what can we achieve, and what kind of support can we get? And I think then you start to have a plan to move forward.
Valerie?
I completely agree. It's figuring out first how you want to contribute, if you want to contribute, right? So if you do want to contribute, it's figuring out how you can help. And I at least at my organization, I would like to say we're always looking for help. Everyone is so resource strapped that if someone comes and says, I want to do this, I want to lead this, we're all about professional development and developing our people. And this is a stretch skill that we want for people to have. So I think, you know, if you don't know who to go to, if you're new, you don't know maybe which leader to go to, maybe start with the chief HR officer, chief people officer, or maybe an HR business partner that you know, and just start asking those basic questions, getting a feel for it. And I think once you're at the company, you'll start to see a lot of inclusive leaders shine more than others. Because let's be real, an executive leadership team, they're all not going to fully embrace diversity and inclusion. They're not. But there are going to be those 1, 2, 3 that really are the stars, that are really authentic and that welcome and have an open door policy. And you find those people, figure out how you want to contribute. And I believe me, they will find a way. They'll start to champion you, and they'll find ways to sponsor you.
And then Tashia?
Everything that they said. Just, you know, no, seriously, like just, you know, take a little bit of time and get a pulse on the organization, whether the department or the organization, because you're new, you're still filling out your way. But, you know, I would say over time or in time, you will see the change agents, the change makers, but also look at your peers. So look, you know, network across to see if you're hearing conversations from your peers who are expressing some of the same sentiments, some of the same concerns, because you guys could probably, you know, come up with solutions together and present that to the chief talent officer or even your immediate boss or whoever it may be, decision maker, to make some change. I will say, you know, same thing, you know, second what Valerie and Suresh said, make sure that it's always solution and results, solution driven. No one wants to hear about all the problems or the holes. Trust me, they are fully aware of the holes in their organization. I'm not gonna say they don't care, they just like, we're trying to, the bottom line is cranking out whatever to make dollars. But if you can identify the holes and plug them in, that's where the optics are a bit different. But again, I would say there's strength in numbers. So find your peers, and then, you know, you guys can build together and then go to the leadership to, you know, make your voices heard.
Well, I wish this conversation could go on forever. And this has been awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. This has been a great conversation. Thank you to Valerie, thank you Suresh, thank you Tashia for being here and volunteering your time to share your thoughts and experiences with all of us. For our participants, our exciting news, our next PRSSA Reimagined panel will be held by Samford University and will be all about different agencies and the different agency life on Thursday, October 8th at 7 p.m. And the registration link will be dropped into the chat soon. So, you know, sign up now and secure your spot for the next week. So at this time, we are going to transition into our breakout rooms and to do a little bit of student networking. And anyone who is unable to participate, feel free to hop off the call now. But thank you again for all being here. Thank you to our panelists. It has been great hearing you and sharing your experiences. So feel free to log off at this point and we will get started with the breakout rooms. And I will
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
You all. Thank you.
Good
Thank
to meet
you for
everyone.
having me.
Bye.
Have a wonderful evening.